The wind whispered secrets through the towering pines, bending them like shadows in the moonlight. Emily Parker stood by the old cabin window, watching mist curl along the ground like living smoke. The night felt wrong to still, too expectant, like the woods themselves were listening. Behind her, the fire popped, throwing long, jagged shadows across the log walls. She told herself it was just nerves, but deep down, fear had already taken root. This cabin was supposed to be a sanctuary, a retreat from the nightmare they'd left behind. The HOA had turned their suburban dream into a war zone, piling on fines for nonsense, threatening liens, and sending nasty letters dripping with malice. When Cole suggested disappearing to the mountains for a while, Emily didn't hesitate. She wanted peace, quiet, and the simple sound of wind in the trees. But peace never lasts when enemies keep score. Cole sat in the armchair by the window, a silent sentinel with eyes like steel. His broad shoulders filled the space, tension radiating from him like heat from the fire. He hadn't spoken much since they arrived, and Emily knew better than to push. When Cole got quiet, it meant he was calculating, anticipating, preparing. She saw it once in his Delta Force, days right before missions nobody ever spoke about. Emily stirred the soup simmering on the stove, the wooden spoon trembling in her hand. The rich aroma should have felt comforting, but unease soured everything tonight. She kept glancing at the door, half expecting someone or something to appear out of the darkness. No one should know they were here. They hadn't told a soul, yet the silence outside pressed against the cabin walls like an intruder waiting. "For an invitation?" she said softly, breaking the oppressive quiet. His head tilted slightly, not looking at her, his eyes locked on the tree line beyond the glass. "You hear that?" His voice was low, barely more than a whisper, but it sliced through her nerves like a blade. Emily froze, spoon hovering over, the pot straining to catch whatever sound he had caught. For a moment, there was only the crackle of fire and her pounding heart. Emily held her breath, the spoon slipping from her fingers and clattering against the pot. The sound seemed deafening in the stillness, echoing like a gunshot through the tiny cabin. Cole didn't flinch. His focus remained fixed, muscles tight as wire. She followed his gaze, eyes darting toward the black woods pressing against the glass. The night looked empty, but emptiness can hide the worst things. Then she heard it, a faint crunch of leaves, almost polite, like someone trying not to be heard. Her pulse slammed against her ribs, and her mouth went dry as she moved closer to Cole. "Could be an animal." "Oh," she whispered, though the words sounded weak even to her own ears. Cole didn't answer, only slid one hand behind the chair where Emily knew he kept a weapon. The fire hissed as if warning them both. Another sound followed, closer this time, the soft, deliberate scrape of boots on wooden steps. Emily's blood turned to ice and her mind screamed, "No one knows we're here." Cole stood slowly, controlled, his towering frame moving with predatory grace. He gave her a look of warning and a command all at once that rooted her to the spot. Then came the knock, sharp and heavy, like judgment falling on their door. 9-3 hard knocks, spaced evenly, like the rhythm of a funeral drum. Emily's stomach lurched, and her throat constricted as her eyes darted to Cole. He was already moving. Silent as a shadow, his fingers curling around the grip of the pistol tucked beneath his flannel. For a moment, the world shrank to that sound, echoing through the cabin like a heartbeat. Whoever stood outside wasn't lost. They were here with purpose. "0, stay here," Cole said, voice low but unshakable, like stone grinding against steel. Emily wanted to protest, to tell him not to open the door, but her tongue felt nailed to the roof of her mouth. The knock came again, harder this time. Rattling the frame, shadows shifted under the door as boots scraped against the porch. Cole moved forward, gun ready, every step as measured as a soldier's march into hell. The door creaked as the visitor's weight shifted, and then came the voice, calm, deep, and official. "Police, open up." Emily's breath hitched as her eyes flew to Cole, whose expression didn't flicker. He glanced at her once, then tilted his head toward the darkened corner near the fireplace. She understood instantly. Hide. Her legs felt heavy as lead, but fear pushed her across the room. Emily crouched low behind the old cedar chest, heart pounding so hard she swore it shook the boards beneath her. The man outside knocked again, louder, the wood trembling in its frame. "We need to speak with you immediately," the voice demanded, authority dripping like oil. Cole eased toward the door, gun held low but ready, his breathing slow, measured. Every muscle in his body seemed carved from iron. The knock turned to pounding, and Emily flinched at each blow. Whoever he wasn't patient, and that terrified her more than anything. Cole's voice cut through the chaos, calm as midnight. "Frost. Badge." A pause followed, long and heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. Then the voice returned, colder now. "Don't make this hard. Open the door." For Emily's stomach sank. No officer she'd ever heard sounded like that, flat, threatening, almost bored. Cole's eyes narrowed, and his fingers tightened on the pistol grip. He reached slowly for the latch, his movements deliberate, controlled. The pounding ceased, and silence fell like a shroud, thick and suffocating. Then the man spoke again, voice low enough to slither through the cracks. "Last chance." Cole unlatched the door with a sudden motion and yanked it open just enough to reveal the man on the porch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a police uniform that looked right at first glance, but something was off. No badge glinted under the porch light, and no squad car idled behind him, just endless black woods. His hand rested on the butt of a pistol strapped to his hip, and his smile crooked. Cole didn't belong to any cop. "Sixth evening," the man said, voice smooth as glass, but sharp underneath. His eyes flicked past Cole, scanning the dim cabin interior like a wolf sizing up prey. "We've had reports of suspicious activity out here." Cole didn't move, didn't blink, just let the silence stretch until it snapped. "You got ID?" he asked flatly, and something flickered in the man's gaze, a flash of irritation, quickly smothered. He shifted his stance, boots creaking on the porch. Emily hugged her knees tighter, barely breathing, praying the floorboards wouldn't groan beneath her. Cole's presence at the door was a wall of control, but she could feel the tension thrumming beneath his skin like a live wire. The fake. Cop's fingers twitched near his holster, and Emily's stomach dropped like a stone. Something ugly was about to break loose. And then it did, fast and brutal, like lightning splitting the night. The man's hand darted for his gun, steel flashing in the porch light. Cole moved in the same heartbeat, a blur of precision and fury. The door slammed open as Cole lunged forward, his pistol raised, voice a thunderclap. "Drop it." The fake cop's grin widened instead, like this was exactly what he wanted. And then the first shot shattered the silence, echoing like a scream through the trees. Emily clamped her hands over her ears, the crack of gunfire rattling through her bones. Another shot followed, then a grunt, then the crash of bodies slamming into the porch railing. Shadows writhed beyond the doorframe, a violent dance lit by the strobe of muzzle flashes. Her lungs burned as she fought to breathe, heart hammering like a war drum. She wanted to run, to help, to do something, but terror nailed her down. Then came a sickening thud, heavy and final, and silence crashed back into the world. Emily dared a glance over the cedar chest, vision swimming in the dim light. Cole stood in the doorway, chest heaving, his gun still leveled at the man sprawled across the porch. Blood darkened, the wooden planks like spilled ink, glistening under the moonlight. And the fake cop's smile was going to wiped clean by death or something close to it. Emily stumbled toward the doorway, her legs trembling like paper in the wind. The night air bit at her skin, sharp and cold, heavy with the metallic temps of blood. The man on the porch groaned, not dead but close, his breath wet and ragged. Cole! Crouched beside him, gun still trained, eyes like shards of ice. "Who sent you?" he asked, voice low enough to chill the marrow in her bones. The fake cop coughed, spitting crimson across the boards, his grin creeping back like a bad omen. "You're in the wrong neighborhood," he rasped, the words bubbling with blood. Emily felt her stomach twist at the sight, bile rising in her throat. Cole's gaze didn't waver, his hand steady as death itself. "That's not an answer," he said, pressing the barrel against the man's temple with surgical calm. 3. Emily wanted to scream at Cole to stop, to call someone, anyone, but her voice wouldn't come. The woods swallowed her pleas before. They even left her mind, the silence thick and merciless. The fake cop's eyes darted, not in fear, but calculation, as if he was still 2 moves ahead. "They don't like you," he whispered, lips curling in cruel amusement, "and they pay real good for quiet solutions." Emily's blood turned to ice as the truth slammed into her chest like a freight train. This wasn't random. This wasn't some drifter or lunatic wandering the mountains. Someone had hired this man, someone who knew exactly where they'd be. And in that moment, Emily realized there was only one enemy twisted enough to follow them here. 5, the HOA, she breathed, her voice cracking under the weight of it. Cole didn't glance at her, didn't move, didn't speak, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, the confirmation she didn't want. The fake cop chuckled weakly, a wet, rattling sound that curdled the air. "Bingo," he coughed, spitting. Another dark splash onto the porch. "Guess the welcome committee ain't what it used to be, huh?" 6. Emily staggered back, clutching the doorframe as nausea clawed up her throat. Her mind flashed with images of Brad Wheeler's smug grin, his thinly veiled threats in board meetings, the last letter dripping with venom. She thought those words, "You'll regret this," were empty bluster. She thought walking away would end the war. But wars don't end when the enemy's ego is still bleeding. 7. Cole pressed harder with the gun, his voice dropping to something feral. "Names," he demanded, and Emily swore the air itself trembled. The man's laughter dissolved into a hacking cough, staining his teeth with crimson. "You think you scare me?" he wheezed, eyes glittering like broken glass. "You've no idea what they promised me for your head." Emily's stomach churned, and fear slithered through her veins like ice water. 8. Cole shifted his grip and drove his knee into the man's ribs, pulling a scream from his cracked lips. The sound sliced through the night, bouncing off the trees. Like a desperate echo, Emily flinched, but couldn't look away. The man on the porch wasn't just a threat, he was a message. A bloody, living letter written in bone and pain. Cole was determined to read every word. 9. Talk, Cole snarled, the word vibrating with barely leashed violence. The man's grin faltered, cracking like old paint under the weight of Cole's fury. "Brad," he choked finally, each syllable dripping with defeat. "Brad Wheeler. Wanted it done clean. Said make it look like a robbery." Emily's vision tunneled, rage and terror tangling in her chest like barbed wire. Brad didn't just cross a line, he burned it to ash. 30. Cole stood, looming over the bleeding man like judgment incarnate. For a moment, Emily thought he'd pull the trigger and end it all right there. But instead, he lowered the gun, eyes narrowing with cold calculation. "You're going to tell me everything?" he said, voice smooth as death's whisper. "And if you lie, I'll know." The man swallowed hard, and for the first time that night, fear flickered in his eyes. 3. Emily's knees gave out, and she slid to the floor, her fingers digging into the wood-like claws. Her mind spun with images of board meetings and smiling neighbors holding ballots, masking the rot underneath. Brad Wheeler, Mr. Perfect Lawn, Mr. Community Spirit, had sent a killer to their door. The sheer insanity of it made bile rise in her throat. This wasn't a feud anymore. This was war. 3. Cole crouched low again, his voice a calm blade cutting through the chaos. "How many others?" he asked, words crisp as shattered glass. The fake cop grimaced, blood trailing from his lips like ink on paper. "Enough," he rasped, coughing hard, his chest hitching with pain. "Enough to make you both disappear without a damn ripple." 33. Emily's heart stuttered, her breath snagging in her throat like a snare. She wanted to believe this man was bluffing, spinning lies to feel powerful. But the way he said it, flat, certain, like a man reading a script, made her veins flood. With ice, Cole's face didn't change, but his eyes darkened, a storm gathering behind calm seas. "Names," he said again, voice hard enough to crack bone. 34. The man coughed and spat something dark and thick onto the porch, like he was purging secrets with blood. "Brad," he said again, then sucked in a ragged breath. "And a committee." Emily's skin prickled, the word crawling down her spine like spiders. Committee. Not just breeds others. Pulling strings, writing checks, voting on murder like a landscaping budget. Her stomach lurched violently. 35 Cole leaned closer, the shadows slicing across his face like war paint. "Why?" he asked, not loud but with enough force to bend steel. The man wheezed out a laugh that sounded like broken glass tumbling down a chute. "You embarrassed him," he rasped, coughing again, blood flecking his teeth. "Took his power. Now he wants yours." 36 Emily's thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. All because they refused to pay? Because they fought back against the fines, the threats, the endless harassment? She remembered the last meeting Cole, standing tall, telling them they had no right to control lives. Brad's face had gone red, his jaw ticking, his smile stretched too thin. "You'll regret this," he'd said. And now she understood exactly what he meant. 37 Cole stood slowly, towering over the man like a shadow carved from stone. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of thunder. "You're going to take me to them," he said. The man's eyes flicked wide, fear-breaking, through his bravado like a crack in a dam. "You're insane," he croaked, his voice trembling. Cole smiled and it wasn't warm. 38 Emily lurched forward, words spilling out before she could catch them. "Cole, no. We need the police, real police." Her voice cracked under the weight of panic, shattering in the cold night. Cole turned his head slowly, his gaze pinning her where she knelt. "Ellie," he said, calm but unyielding, "the HOA owns the sheriff's cousin. You think a phone call fixes this?" The truth hit her like a sledgehammer. 39 The man chuckled again, a rattling sound that raised gooseflesh on Emily's arms. "He's right," he crooned, voice rasping like sandpaper. "Your aunts. Under their boots, they don't lose. Ever." Emily wanted to scream at him to shut up, to stop feeding the fire burning in Cole's eyes. But her throat locked tight as a sob swelled inside her, choking the air from her lungs. This wasn't survival anymore, this was vengeance. 40 Cole hauled the man to his feet with brutal efficiency, like hoisting a sack of grain. The fake cop groaned, his body folding in pain as Cole dragged him down the steps. Emily scrambled after them, cold mud sucking at her bare feet, her breath ghosting in frantic clouds. "Cole, please," she begged, grabbing his arm, but he didn't even slow. His voice was iron, unbending. "We finish this tonight." 4. The trees swallowed them whole, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The path to the truck was a tunnel of darkness, the crunch of boots, and the fake cop's wheezing breaths the only sounds. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears, a frantic drumbeat counting down to something catastrophic. Cole opened the truck door with a violent jerk and shoved the man inside like discarded luggage. Emily's pleas ricocheted off his silence. For the engine roared to life, headlights slicing twin spears through the night, illuminating the winding gravel road. Emily climbed in reluctantly, her hands trembling, her breath shallow and quick. The fake cop slumped in the back seat, his face pale, blood pooling in his collar like spilled ink. Cole gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles gleamed white under the dashboard light. He wasn't just driving, he was hunting. 43 Emily stared at him, at the rigid set of his jaw, the storm raging in his eyes. "Cole," she whispered, her voice a thread on the edge of breaking. "This isn't you." He didn't look at her, didn't blink, didn't breathe anything but fire. "This is exactly me," he said, his words low and lethal, slicing through. The hum of the engine. For the first time, Emily wasn't sure if she was more afraid of Brad Wheeler, her own husband. 44, the truck jolted over a rut, sending the fake cop's body slamming against the door with a hollow thud. He groaned weakly, lifting his head just enough to spit a laugh. "You're dead, men," he croaked, blood bubbling between his teeth. Cole's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, cold and merciless. "You first," he said flatly, his foot pressing harder on the gas, gravel spitting like sparks behind them. The cabin vanished in the rearview. swallowed by trees and night, replaced by a road that wound toward something far worse. Emily pressed her forehead to the cold glass, tears stinging her eyes as dread sank into her bones like winter frost. There was no going back now, no undoing what Cole had set in motion. Ahead lay only darkness and the men who wanted them dead. And Cole was driving straight into it. 46, the truck barreled down the mountain road, its headlights carving through the ink-black forest. Emily's nails dug crescents into her palms as every shadow outside seemed to crawl closer. Cole's silence pressed on her chest like a weight. She couldn't shake. He wasn't planning on talking to the HOA, he was planning on ending this one way or another. And God help anyone standing in his way. 47, the fake cop slumped in the back, blood dripping in slow, rhythmic beats against the seat. His breaths were shallow, but his grin stayed wide, sharp, mocking like a shark circling in shallow water. "They'll kill you slow," he whispered, voice raw and jagged. Emily swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter on her tongue. Cole didn't answer. The only sound was the growl of the engine climbing higher. 48, they reached the old service. Rode a skeletal path carved deep into the woods, a place locals avoided after dark. Trees closed in tight, their gnarled arms knitting together overhead, blotting out the stars. Emily felt the world shrink with every turn, her lungs caged by shadows and silence. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, her voice shaking like brittle glass. Cole's reply was a single word: "Their den." No. 49, the headlights swept across a clearing, and there it was. A lodge crouched in the dark like a predator, its windows glowing faintly with warm light. A few cars sat outside, polished SUVs gleaming under the weak moon, their reflections like hungry eyes. Emily's gut twisted into knots as realization dawned. They weren't hiding, they were meeting. The HOA wasn't just a board tonight, it was a council of war. Lifty Cole killed the lights, letting the truck roll to a silent stop behind a wall of trees. Emily's breath caught as he reached under the seat and pulled out a duffel bag black. Heavy, bristling with deadly purpose. She stared, her pulse thundering in her ears. "Cole," she whispered, but her voice broke under the weight of terror. He looked at her then, eyes dark steel, and said, "Stay here." 5, Emily shook her head violently, panic clawing up her throat. "No, you can't, Cole. This isn't war." Her words shattered when he unzipped the bag, revealing the gleam of cold metal, knives, ammo, a rifle that looked like it belonged on a battlefield, not in a forest. "It was war," he said quietly, sliding a knife into his belt with surgical calm. "The moment they sent him to our door." 5, the fake cop coughed, spattering blood across the upholstery, his laughter bubbling like swamp gas. "You think you're walking in there and out alive?" he rasped, his grin splitting his battered face. Cole didn't spare him a glance. He slung the rifle across his chest, movements crisp and practiced, every inch the man Emily prayed she'd never see. Again, the man built for death. The delta in him was awake. 53, Emily grabbed his arm, her nails biting into his skin. "If you go in there like this, you'll never come back to me," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Romos love? Maybe both, but it burned out quick. "I already left," he said softly, pulling free, the words cutting deeper than any blade. And then he was gone, swallowed by the trees like smoke. 54, Emily sat frozen, breath shallow, every second stretching like wire pulled taut. The fake cop chuckled behind her, low and rasping, and it crawled down her spine like acid. "He'll paint that lodge red," he crooned, his words oozing like poison. Emily spun, fury flaring bright in her chest, but he only smiled wider, teeth slick. "With blood, and when they find you, they'll blame you for every drop." 55, the clearing hummed with distant voices muffled under the lodge's timber bones. Emily strained to listen, catching snatches Brad's oily drawl, laughter sharp as knives, phrases like, "Vote him out for good." Rage boiled under her. Fear, thick and choking. This wasn't about peace, about rules they wanted dominance, obedience at any cost. They weren't neighbors anymore, they were executioners in suits and smiles. 56. Then gunfire cracked the night. One shot. Two. A scream sliced through the trees, raw and desperate, then choked out mid-breath. Emily clapped a trembling hand over her mouth. Her heart beat a stampede in her ears. Shadows flickered beyond the clearing, jerking like marionettes. As chaos erupted inside the lodge, and somewhere in that darkness, Cole moved like death-given form. 57. Emily's body shook, torn between bolting into the woods or running toward the firestorm ahead. Then a new sound crawled through the night, laughter, low and guttural, dripping with menace. She whipped around, her blood icing over. The fake cop sat up straighter despite his wounds, his grin stretching too wide. "You really think he's hunting them?" he whispered, his eyes glinting like broken glass. "Sweetheart, you're hunting him." 58. Emily's stomach plunged as headlights flared to life behind the truck, flooding the cab in blinding white. Engines rumbled 2, 3, maybe more, closing in fast, like wolves scenting blood. She spun, catching glimpses of dark shapes, armed men moving through the trees with silent precision. The HOA hadn't been waiting, they'd been ready. Now the trap was snapping shut around all of them. 59. Her breath hitched, panic detonating in her chest as doors slammed and boots crunched on gravel. Voices barked orders, cold and efficient, slicing through the dark like blades. Emily clawed at the door handle, her fingers slick with sweat, her mind screaming one word over and over: run. But it was too late. A shadow loomed at her window, and the muzzle of a gun kissed the glass with a soft tap. Emily froze, her screams strangled in her throat as the door wrenched open and hands like iron clamped around her arms. The fake cop laughed, his voice a broken hymn echoing through the chaos. "Told you," he croaked, blood bubbling on his lips. "Nobody leaves." And as Emily was dragged into the blinding glare of headlights, she saw something through the trees, a flash of movement, a spray of blood and Cole, standing there, smiling. The room exploded into chaos, shards glittering like jagged snow. As smoke curled from the shattered window, Emily hit the floor hard, her palms slamming against blood-slick wood, breath ripping in and out like tearing paper. The fake cop lay sprawled beside her, his lifeless eyes wide and glassy, a river of red blooming under his skull. Cole moved before thought existed, flipping the table with a brutal kick, wood splintering into a barricade. His voice sliced through the roar of her heartbeat. "Stay down!" Outside, engines snarled, tires screeching across gravel, headlights carving savage arcs through the dark. Emily crawled to the overturned table, her chest hammering against her ribs like a drum of war. Gunfire cracked, a staccato storm shredding. The night, bullets chewing holes in the walls like rabid teeth. Sparks spat from the fireplace screen as rounds slammed into brick, sending embers whirling like fireflies on the wind. Cole's shadow loomed over her, solid, unyielding, a wall. Of muscle and steel. 3. Emily, eyes on me. His voice snapped her from the spiral clawing through her mind, his stare locking her back into reality. She nodded, though every nerve screamed to run, to flee, to claw through the walls like a trapped animal. Cole's hands moved with lethal precision, stripping a magazine, feeding fresh rounds into the pistol like a ritual older than fear. His jaw was carved from granite, his breath calm, controlled, deadly, and outside, the kill squad tightened its noose. For the house shook as another volley slammed through the walls, spraying splinters across the floor like wooden shrapnel. Pressed her cheek to the cold floorboards, tasting dust, blood, and smoke as her heart tried to claw through her chest. Cole ducked low, peering through the jagged hole in the window, eyes sharp as razors slicing the darkness. A voice barked outside, muffled, commanding, hungry for blood. And Emily knew this wasn't random chaos. This was a hunt. 5. Cole grabbed her wrists, hauling her upright with the force of a storm. "Move," he hissed, and she stumbled after him as bullets stitched fiery trails along the walls. The air reeked of gunpowder, acrid and thick, clinging to her tongue like poisoned smoke. Her feet slid across polished floors slick with blood, her breath coming in ragged sobs that scraped her throat raw. Somewhere behind them, Brad Wheeler was laughing still, low and venomous, like the hiss of a coiled serpent. 6 they dove into. A narrow hallway, the door exploding behind them in a hail of splinters as boots thundered across the threshold. Emily slammed into the wall, pain flaring white behind her eyes, as Cole shoved her toward the stairs. "Basement!" he barked, his voice hard enough to break bone. She stumbled down, gripping the banister like a lifeline, feet pounding hollow against wooden steps. Above, men roared orders, their voices slicing through the air like hunting knives. 7 The basement was a tomb of shadows, damp and cold, the stench of mildew clawing at Emily's throat. She froze halfway down, every instinct screaming to turn back, to flee toward the open night. Cole was already ahead, sweeping the corners, gun steady, breath calm as if the storm above were nothing but distant thunder. "Cole," she whispered, her voice trembling like a dying flame. "There's no way out." His reply was a razor. "There's always a way out." He found it a rotted hatch, half hidden behind crates, the metal hinges groaning like a beast disturbed. Cole dropped to one knee, wrenching the rusted bolt free with brutal strength, his muscles cording like steel cables. Emily crouched beside him, her breath fogging in frantic bursts, every sound from above drilling into her bones. Boots hammered the floor above, the kill squad spreading like wolves scenting blood. The hatch yawned open, black and bottomless, promising nothing but cold earth. "9 go," Cole ordered, voice low, taut with urgency. Emily hesitated, staring into the void like it was swallowing the last of her courage whole. Then a shot cracked above splinters, raining down the stairs like wooden hail, and she dropped, her hands clawing through dirt and rot. The tunnel stank of damp decay, its walls squeezing close like the jaws of a grave. Behind her, Cole slid in, pulling the hatch shut just as boots thundered into the basement. Zero darkness wrapped them in a suffocating shroud, broken only by the rasp of their breath and the distant roar of voices. Emily crawled, fingers raw against stone and roots, every scrape a scream in her nerves. Cole's presence loomed behind her, silent and steady, the heat of him a shield in the black. Gunfire rattled the boards above, bullets punching through empty air where they'd knelt seconds before. And then the trapdoor ripped open, flooding the tunnel with light. Bullets speared into the tunnel walls, dirt and stones spitting like volcanic ash as Emily crawled faster, heart pounding like a war drum. Cole's hand clamped her ankle, dragging her out of the line of fire with brutal force. The beam of a flashlight stabbed through the hatch above, sweeping like a blade, voices barking orders that vibrated through the soil. Emily bit down on. A scream as a round zipped past her ear, hot as a wasp's sting. Then darkness slammed back as Cole hurled something upward and the world exploded. The blast roared like a dragon, heat and pressure smashing Emily flat against the earth. Her ears rang with a shrill, endless scream that might have been her own. Dirt raining like a storm as the tunnel shuddered around them. Cole yanked her forward, his grip iron, dragging her deeper into blackness. Smoke choked the air, bitter and acrid, curling through her lungs like barbed wire. Behind them, shouts turned to chaos, men coughing, cursing, clawing through the wreckage. 3 Emilys. Knees burned, her palms slick with blood and grime as they crawled through the suffocating dark. The tunnel twisted like a snake, forcing her down, sideways, through gaps that felt smaller than her bones. Every breath was mud, every heartbeat a thunderclap in her skull. Cole moved with predator's grace, never slowing, never faltering, his shadow leading her like death's own compass. She wanted to cry, to stop, but his voice cut through the black. Keep moving. For finally, a whisper of night air kissed her sweat-soaked skin, cool and damp and tasting of pine. Emily surged toward it like a drowning soul breaching water, her fingers clawing through loose soil until the earth gave way. She tumbled out into the forest, stars bleeding silver through a ceiling of black branches. The cold slapped her raw, shocking her lungs awake, but she didn't care. She could breathe again. Cole emerged behind her, silent as a shadow. 5 The night stretched endless, trees looming like iron bars, their roots clutching the earth like claws. Emily staggered upright, swaying on trembling legs as Cole scanned the dark with eyes that missed nothing. His chest rose and fell slow. Steady, the calm of a storm that knows its own strength. In his hands, the rifle gleamed like a promise of violence. Behind them, the tunnel gaped like a wound, spilling smoke and faint. Furious voices clawed through the night. "Six, they'll follow," Emily rasped, her voice shredded raw by dirt and fear. Cole's head tilted, listening to something she couldn't hear, his jaw tightening like steel under pressure. "Good," he murmured, and the word chilled her to the marrow. Then he seized her wrist and pulled her into the trees, his steps. Silent, surgical, a ghost threading the dark. Emily stumbled after him, branches whipping her face, roots snagging her ankles like skeletal fingers. 7. The forest swallowed them whole, a labyrinth of shadows and whispering leaves where moonlight bled like silver wounds. Emily's breath rasped like sandpaper, her lungs screaming for rest, but Cole never slowed. He moved like water over stone. Soundless, his senses wired into the night as if the darkness itself were his ally. She wanted to scream at him to demand what the hell this was, but words turned to ash on her tongue. Survival was the only language left. 8 behind them. Injuns snarled closer now, hunting the silence with predatory hunger. Emily flinched. As headlights knifed through the trees, beams slicing like blades through the black, shadows writhed and scattered as voices barked orders, cold and sharp as steel on bone. Cole yanked her off the trail, shoving her behind a fallen log as the first vehicle ground past, its tires crunching dead leaves. Emily pressed against the moss, her pulse pounding so loud she feared it would give them away. 9, she dared a glance. Froze. The truck wasn't alone. 2 more rumbled behind it, their grills glinting like the fangs of beasts, their cargo beds bristling with men in black. Rifles rested across their laps, gleaming under the sterile glow of LED bars, faces hidden. Behind masks like the hollow skulls of executioners, these weren't neighbors with grudges. These were soldiers, mercenaries painted in the HOA's colors of greed and blood. And they were fanning out like wolves. 0. Cole's hand pressed to her shoulder, grounding her like an anchor in a storm. He leaned close, breath a ghost on her ear, his words coiled tight as wire, their tracking heat. "We move when they pass." Emily swallowed hard, bile burning her throat as the hunters stalked past, boots crunching deadfall in surgical rhythm. A low hum drifted overhead, mechanical and cold, crawling under her skin like ice. She looked up, and her heart fractured. A drone circled the treetops, its camera, eye glowing red. Panic detonated in her chest, scattering her thoughts like glass, but Cole's grip crushed the fear back down. "Stay low," he hissed, and slid into motion like a shadow shedding its skin. Emily followed on trembling hands and knees, every nerve screaming as the drone's hum thickened the air like a predator's growl. Branches clawed at her hair, damp earth smeared her skin, but she kept crawling, kept breathing, kept praying. Behind them, voices rose like wolves baying for blood. They slithered through ferns and roots, vanishing into the marrow of the woods as the hunters spread like a disease. Cole paused only once, his eyes flicking skyward, reading the drone's orbit like scripture. Then his hand dipped into his vest, pulling free something small, metallic, wicked. Emily watched him thumb a switch, his face lit by the ghost glow. "Of a tiny lead EMP," he murmured, and lobbed it skyward, with a flick so fluid it seemed unreal. 3. The pulse cracked like silent lightning, rippling through the night with a shiver Emily felt in her teeth. The drone spasmed midair, its glow stuttering like a dying star before it spiraled into the canopy in a storm of sparks. Voices erupted behind them, furious, frantic, pounding the dark with curses. Cole didn't wait. He surged forward, dragging her into the deeper black, where the trees knitted tight like ribs around a beating heart. The forest swallowed the sound whole, for Emily stumbled, her breath tearing like paper as her legs screamed in agony. Every muscle burned molten, her lungs clawing for air thick as oil. But Cole moved like a ghost wreathed in steel. His presence was gravity, pulling her onward through roots and shadows, through silence so deep it howled. She wanted to collapse, to melt into the earth, to let the dark take her. But then, Voices flared behind them. Man's survival ripped her forward. 5 Cole, she choked, her voice shredded, raw, tasting of iron and fear. They're everywhere, how do we her? Words died as he spun, his hand sealing her mouth with merciless strength. His other hand drew the knife, the blade whispering silver in the dark as he sank into a crouch. Emily's pulse convulsed under his palm, her eyes wide as saucers as shadows flickered through the trees. Boots, voices, laughter like broken glass. The wolves had found the scent. 3 figures slipped through the dark, rifles raised, scanning the undergrowth with predator patience. Emily's heart tried to claw through her ribs as they drew closer, their faces masked, their breath steaming like ghosts in the cold. Cole moved with liquid death, his knife flashing like a silent scream as he melted into the black. She wanted to warn them to scream, but her breath stayed caged behind his iron grip. And then the first man dropped without a sound. 7 had happened too fast for her mind to catch. 1 heartbeat, 3 hunters. The next, 2, their leader yanked into the dark with a gurgle of shredded air. Emily bit her lip until blood bloomed on her tongue, her pulse detonating as Cole ghosted behind the second. The blade whispered, wet and soft, and his body folded like paper into the ferns. The third man froze, terror blooming in his stance, then spun, rifle snapping up like a striking serpent. 8 Cole hit him like thunder, a blur of motion and bone that cracked like breaking trees. The rifle coughed fire, the shot ripping through leaves as Cole drove the blade home, twisting until the night swallowed the scream. Emily trembled in the dark, her breath a jagged sob she couldn't contain, bile clawing up her throat like acid. Cole crouched over the bodies, his hands quick, merciless, stripping weapons and ammo with predator precision. His eyes burned like twin coals in the black. He returned to her without a word, pressing a rifle into her trembling hands. The cold steel shocked her bones, the weight like an anchor dragging her soul under. "Take it," Cole ordered, his voice flat, forged from iron and war. Emily shook, her head violently, her voice breaking as fear shredded it into ribbons. I can tithe." Never his stare cut her protest to ribbons. "Tonight you will." 30, her fingers clenched the weapon like it was venom, her pulse convulsing in her wrists as she swallowed a sob. Cole's hand brushed her cheek, not soft, not cruel, just grounding, like iron chains keeping her tethered to the earth. "Stay behind me. Shoot if you must. Don't hesitate." His words sank like bullets, carving scars across her fear. And then he turned, melting back into the dark where death waited like an old friend. 3, the forest deepened into a cathedral. Of shadows, the trees towering like black spires against a sky bleeding silver. Emily stumbled after Cole, her grip on the rifle slick with sweat, her breath tearing holes in the silence. Every root was a tripwire, every branch a claw, every shadow a grave waiting to open. Behind them, the wolves' proud voices low, lethal, rippling through the night like poisoned whispers. Cole stopped suddenly, his hand slicing the air, commanding, her stillness like a law of nature. 3, he crouched low, eyes scanning the earth like a hunter reading scripture in blood and bone. Emily's chest heaved, terror pulsing in her veins as Cole's fingers brushed the dirt, mapping prints invisible to her eyes. Then he moved swift, deliberate, stringing something between 2 saplings, with a grace that made her blood run. Colder, a wire, a trap, death disguised as silence. When he straightened, his voice was a ghost in her ear. "Stay low and keep breathing." 33, they melted into the ferns, the world around them dripping with moonlight like liquid mercury. Emily hugged the earth, her heart hammering in her skull as footsteps grew louder, crunching dead leaves like brittle bones. 3 shadows emerged through the trees, rifles glinting like fangs, eyes hidden behind night vision goggles that burned green fire. Their breath steamed in the chill, the fog curling like smoke from a funeral pyre. And then the first one hit. The wire. 34, the snap was soft, almost tender, a lover's kiss before the scream. The mercenary's body yanked skyward, flipping like a marionette with cut strings before the branch above ripped him into silence. His rifle spat fire as he spun, bullets clawing the night before he hung limp in the dark. The others froze, curses hissing through their teeth as they spun. Scanning the black with eyes that saw everything but Cole, Emily clamped a hand over her mouth to cage the scream clawing up her throat. 35 Cole moved like smoke, a ripple in the dark, his knife flashing silver before the second man even registered the whisper behind him. Blood sprayed the ferns, black under the moon, as the murk collapsed in a silent prayer to gravity. The last one bolted, panic detonating in his veins, his boots hammering the earth in a blind sprint. Cole didn't chase. He raised the stolen rifle, the shot cracking like Judgment Day through the trees. Silence fell, heavy as a shroud. 36 Emily couldn't breathe. The forest pressed down on her like a living thing, every shadow a hand clawing at her skin, every heartbeat a scream. Cole approached without sound, his presence a tide swallowing her whole, his face carved from ice and fire. He knelt, stripping, the bodies with a surgeon's calm, his fingers dancing through pouches and belts like a ritual of death. When he spoke, his voice was iron wrapped in midnight. "They're calling reinforcements. We keep moving." Darty 7, the words were knives in her spine, slicing through the fragile hope she'd clung to. Emily staggered upright, her legs quivering like brittle glass, the rifle a dead weight dragging at her soul. Cole was already moving, his silhouette threading the shadows like a phantom sculpted from war. She followed because there was nothing. Else because standing still meant death wearing a neighbor's smile. The night closed around them, whispering secrets in tongues older than blood. 38, they crossed a gash in the earth, where a creek hissed over black stones, its song soft, sinister, like water dreaming of drowning. Cole paused, crouching to drink, his reflection shattered by ripples that looked like wounds in the dark. Emily knelt beside him, her lips splitting on the cold bite of the stream, the water tasting of iron and earth. Her hands shook so violently, the surface fractured into shards of silver, her breath fogging like ghost smoke. "Cole," she whispered, voice cracking, "what if we don't make it?" 39, his gaze lifted, pinning her like a predator pins prey, his eyes burning with the quiet violence of men who've seen too much war. "Then we make them pay first." The words crawled through her bones, chilling her marrow, sparking something raw and terrible in her chest. Emily wanted to ask 100 questions, to beg for a truth she could hold, but then the night answered. For him, a distant growl of vengeance rolled through the trees, low and hungry as wolves. 40 Cole stiffened, his head tilting, listening to the earth hum with the weight of steel and blood. Emily froze, every nerve lit like a fuse, her heart thrashing as headlights flared through the black like the eyes of beasts. Trucks bigger, this time, their rumble cracking the night like thunder, the smell of fuel bleeding through the trees. Voices barked orders and clipped tones, the cadence of killers, sharp as shattered glass. Then the beam of a spotlight swept the forest like a scythe. "For down," Cole hissed, shoving her flat into the mud as the white glare carved through the dark, slicing trees into jagged skeletons. Emily's breath clawed at her throat as the beam hovered, hunting, sliding slow over roots and stone like a knife savoring the kill. She bit down on a whimper as cold mud kissed her skin, her pulse a war drum battering her ribs. Above, the roar of engines thickened, the sound swelling like a black tide. And then boots hit the ground. For the mercenaries spilled like oil there, rifles gleaming like fangs under the sick white light. Emily counted 8, no, 9 shadows moving with precision, their breath ghosting through the frost, like whispers from graves. One voice rose above the rest, harsh and guttural, the kind of tone that carried the weight of blood debts. Cole's body went still as stone beside her, his muscles coiled like steel cables, his breath a razor whisper. When he spoke it was only 2 words, "Stay here." 43, and then he was gone, melting into the black like he'd been swallowed by the forest's lungs. Emily's pulse convulsed, her fingers clawing at the mud as panic ate her alive. The world narrowed to shadows and sound, the crunch of boots, the hiss of radios, the cold stench of gun oil bleeding through the night. Wanted to scream for him, to drag him back from the jaws of darkness, but fear welded her throat shut. All she could do was wait and pray. 44, the first scream shattered the night like glass under a hammer. raw and ragged, torn from a throat that would never speak again. Emily clamped her hands over her mouth, eyes wide as the forest erupted in chaos shouts. Gunfire, the roar of men blind with terror. Muzzle flashes ripped the dark into jagged frames of fire and death, painting Cole in strobing glimpses here. Gone, a phantom made of smoke and steel. Bodies fell like trees under a hurricane. The wolves had met the storm. 45 Emily curled into the earth as the night burned around her, her breath ripping like paper, tears carving mud down her cheeks. The rifle trembled in her grip, cold as a dead man's hands, heavy as the sins of war. She wanted to close her eyes, to vanish into blackness, but the screams dragged her back, each one a hook in her flesh, and then silence, not peace. Kind of silence that smells like blood and smoke, and tastes like fear. 46 Cole emerged from the black like a revenant, his chest heaving, his hands slick with blood that wasn't his. Emily stared hollow-eyed as he knelt and stripped ammunition from corpses with the calm of a man folding laundry. The night smelled like iron and gunpowder, thick and clinging, a second skin she couldn't peel away. He rasped, voice raw as gravel, eyes like frozen fire. We have minutes before they realize their men are gone. 47 Emily stumbled upright, her knees screaming, her soul screaming louder. But she moved because stillness meant death. Cole shoved a pistol into her hands, the steel kissing her palm with the promise of sin. Safety's off, he muttered, loading mags into his vest like rosary beads of war. Emily wanted to vomit, to cry, to wake up in her bed in the quiet. House, she once cursed. Instead, she nodded and whispered the only truth left. Okay. 48 they ran, the forest whipping past in green and black, every root and stone conspiring to break their bones. The moon bled silver across their path, painting their flight in ghost light as engines howled somewhere beyond the trees. Emily's breath burned, her lungs clawing at air that tasted of ash and death. Cole moved like a predator unleashed, his silhouette cutting through shadows like a blade through silk. She followed, tethered to him by fear, rage, and the fragile thread of survival. 49 then came the voice booming, guttural, rolling through the dark like thunder fed on blood. You think you can hide, soldier? It snarled, soaked in hate, dripping power. Emily froze, her heart a drumbeat of terror as the words slithered between the trees. Cole's head tilted, his jaw tightening, eyes sharpening into knives honed. By memory. They brought a commander, he whispered, and for the first time, fear brushed his voice like frost across steel. A spotlight ignited the night, blinding and brutal, tearing shadows from their graves. Emily flinched, throwing her arms up, the glare searing her eyes, her breath ragged with panic. Cole grabbed her wrist, yanking her down into the ferns, as bullets shredded the trees, bark exploding like splinters of bone. The forest screamed with gunfire, the air burning, stinking of cordite and sap. Crawl, Cole hissed, his voice the lash of a whip. Now, 5, they slithered through roots. And rot, the world shrinking to mud and blood, the howl of lead above their skulls. Emily bit down on a scream as a bullet carved the earth inches from her face, spraying grit across her lips. Cole moved with lethal grace, a panther threading the underbrush, his body singing the music of war. Emily followed, dragging her terror. Like a corpse, every nerve screaming mutiny. Then came the sound that broke her soul, a baby's cry. 5, it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it wove through the gunfire like a ghost song, soft and broken, calling her name in the cracks of her mind. Emily's breath hitched, her muscles locking as the sound rippled through her chest like knives. Cole glanced back, his face a shadow. Carved in rage and warning, they're playing you, he spat. Keep moving or you're dead. 53 she obeyed, though the sound clung to her bones, gnawing, whispering, till she wanted to claw her own ears off. Cole shoved her behind a fallen log, his hands pressing her down with the weight of mountains. Stay low. Shoot if you have to, no hesitation. His eyes burned into hers, a storm of fury and steel, and she nodded. Oh. Though every cell screamed that she wasn't built for this. Cole vanished into the chaos, his shadow bleeding into black. 54 Emily crouched, the pistol trembling like a living thing, her breath slicing her throat with every ragged gasp. The forest was alive with fire and death, muzzle flashes painting. Hell across the night, voices cracked like whips, boots pounded like war drums. And Emily was a child again, hiding from monsters under a bed too small to save her. Then a shadow moved, slinking toward her through the smoke. Slow, patient, predatory. Her finger curled on the trigger, heart detonating. 55, the man rose from the black like a god of war, his rifle glinting, his mask grinning in the glare. Emily's scream clawed her throat as he lunged, the barrel swinging toward her face like a hammer. Time fractured, every sound shattering into shards as her finger jerked, the pistol roaring fire and fury. The shot punched through his skull, painting the ferns with darkness, his body collapsing like a broken altar. Emily dropped the gun and vomited into the mud. 56, her sobs tore the silence, raw and ragged, ripping through the gunfire's fading echo. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just knelt in the dirt, choking on bile and blood and the monstrous truth that now lived in her bones. A hand gripped her shoulder, iron hard, dragging her back from the abyss. Cole knelt before, her eyes burning like coals, his face carved in something that wasn't pity. "Look at me," he rasped, voice like steel drawn slow from its sheath. "You're still alive." 57, she lifted her gaze, drowning in his eyes, in the fury and the fire and the unspoken war they now shared. "I killed him," she choked, the words shards slicing her tongue, her soul bleeding through every syllable. Cole's grip tightened, anchoring her to a world that had turned black and merciless. "You survived," he snarled. "That's what matters. The rest, you bury it deep." And then his head snapped toward the trees, his face hardening into granite. 58 engines roared again, closer this time, the sound swelling like a tidal wave of steel and blood. Headlights slashed the dark, carving the forest into pieces as more wolves spilled from their den. Cole's teeth bared, a feral grin splitting his face like a wound as he rose, rifle in hand. "They want a war," he growled, voice dripping. "Fire. Then let's burn their goddamn world to ash." 59, he yanked Emily to her feet, shoving a fresh magazine into her trembling hands. His eyes wild with a fire that could torch heaven. "Stay close," he snarled, his voice a blade honed on vengeance. Emily nodded, the taste of blood bitter on her tongue, her soul trembling on the edge of something dark and infinite. The forest pulsed with death, the night screaming with vengeance and hate, and together they ran into the black, into the fire, into war. Behind them, the forest swallowed the dead, their secrets rotting in roots and shadows. Ahead, the night stretched like a throat, waiting for the knife, silent and endless and painted in blood. Emily's heart beat like war drums, each thud a vow, a scream, a prayer to gods that no longer listened. Cole's silhouette burned against the moon, a phantom carved from fire and fury, leading her into a storm that would either forge or finish them. And in the distance the wolves howled,